so I may have gone a little bit overboard, but I found an army of over 1,000 AI-powered web scrapers that I can use to scrape any website, all without writing a single line of code. This setup lets me take data from different types of websites and feed it directly into an AI agent in n8n. Web scraping is one of the most powerful tools I've used for lead generation and personalized outreach. But lots of the web scraping tools out there are so technical. So I've spent dozens of hours testing every no-code method out there, and I figured out the 3 easiest ways to scrape any website and get the data into n8n. So first, I'll start with the simplest method for scraping basic websites. Then I'll show you how to handle more advanced sites with dynamic content. And finally, we'll tackle walled gardens like social media and lead databases without getting blocked. So if you want instant access to all these web scraping workflows in n8n, then you can get them in my free school community. Just go to the resources section. So let's jump into our first method. So for this first method, I'm making sure to explain all the tech jargon we come across. So anything like HTTP, HTML, all these fancy words, rather than just saying them and move on, I'm gonna actually explain what they are. So that way, rather than just being able to copy me, you're gonna be able to understand why we're doing each step and then adapt it to make it work for you. So let's jump into our first method. We're gonna be taking a very simple website. So I've just found this random landing page. This person's selling a 3D modeling course, and we're going to try to scrape the information in it. So we're going to copy the URL, and then we're going to go into n8n. And we're going to start off by selecting a trigger. This is just to start the workflow. And the first thing we want is a HTTP request node. So we're going to put that in there, and we want to add the URL. So pretty simple. I'm going to press test step, and we're going to go in and scrape the website, the first pass of scraping. We're going to let that load. So what we can see on the right is this massive block of text. This is called HTML, and this is all the information on the website as well as the code to say how this should be structured on the website. So if we take an example, let's just copy a bit of text here. If we go back into n8n, do Control F to find it, we can see it's in there, but it's just buried in with all this other code, which we don't want. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a node called Markdown. So what Markdown is going to do is going to allow us to take that massive bunch of code, and it's going to let us only extract the key information that we need from the web page, but take away all the extra bits of code that's not necessary. So we're going to drag this data here and put it into HTML. So we're taking the input, we're putting it into this node, and then we can test step to get an output. And there we go, we have a much cleaner bunch of code without all the extra bits that we don't need. So just to explain technically what we covered there. First, we had a HTTP request node. HTTP is just a rule book that lets computers talk to each other online in the most simple sense. Here you have a web page, and it has text, it has images, and the way it gets that is by speaking to web servers. The web servers send that information through HTTP requests, and that's displayed on a web page. So the way it works is you enter the URL here, this sends a request to the server sends it back, and it's displayed on our device. And the code bit is just telling us how it should look like on the screen. So here, like how it should look like, where we should have a headline, when we should have an image, the size of the image, and so forth. So that's what HTML is. It's just a way of showing how we should display the information on the web page. We then have the Markdown node. So the way this works is, here for example, we can see the HTML and we can see the text we want, like hello world, but it has all these extra bits of code that we don't want, and it leads to this massive block of text. So if we're trying to process this using an AI agent or ChatGPT, it makes it more difficult to have all of this. So Markdown takes the HTML and just makes it a lot cleaner. So here's an example, it makes it a lot cleaner and easier to use. So that's just the technical side explained. I want you to understand why we're doing each step, so you're able to adapt this and use this in your own workflows that you create. So if we go back to n8n now, we have this data in this nice clean format. What we want to do next is actually use ChatGPT to get information from it. So if we write OpenAI, and then we do messaging model, first thing you want to do is connect your OpenAI account. So you press this, create new credentials, and then you just need to connect your account by getting your API key and adding it. Once you have that, you want to message a model and then choose the right model from the list. I'm going to go for ChatGPT 4o mini. And now I'm going to walk you through how the OpenAI API works. So we're going to add two sections. It's going to be a section for a system prompt and a section for a user prompt. So the way the OpenAI API works is we have our device. We're going to be sending off a request. We have the OpenAI here. This gets processed in a server and then it gets sent back to our device. When we have the API section, we need to have very specific parameters we send into here to make it work. And part of the OpenAI API, it has a parameter for the system role and the user role. The system role is just basically us telling ChatGPT what behavior it should have. So here we can tell it the tone, the behavior, the role it should take, and the user role is just saying what we want to do. So that's our way of prompting ChatGPT using an API. So if we go back to n8n now, what we're going to say in this section here is that you are a helpful and expert web scraping assistant. And then in the user role, we want to explain what we want it to do. So in this case, we're going to have a prompt for it here as well. So here I have a prompt already prepared. I'm going to put this in. Let's make this a bit bigger so you can see. And the prompt I'm giving it is I'm saying your task is to convert the raw markdown of a website and convert it into structured data. Use the following format. So I want it to give me a list of all the links on this website, a big block of text of all the text in it to make it easy to ask it questions, a one-line summary of the website, and an icebreaker that we can use for a cold email, just to show you some of what we can do. So now we have all of that. We're going to test this step. Now it's executing. We just want to make sure also that the output content JSON is enabled. And then here we have all the different links. We have the text, we have a one-line summary, and we have an icebreaker. So one extra technical thing I've mentioned a couple times now is this JSON bit here. So I've said we want to output this as JSON. I've used JSON to structure this, and here we have JSON as well. So maybe you're thinking, what the hell is JSON? Why are we using it? So let me explain that to you as well. JSON is just a way to organize and store data so that both humans and computers can understand it. So when we organize data in JSON, we make it so that it's very easy to pass data from one node to another in n8n, and it's something that we can understand as well. So here's an example bit of data. And all we're doing is we're labeling data so it's easy to know what data is what, and we're adding values to the data. So here's Alex, this is a string, it could be a number, or in the case where it's many different items under one point, it's called an array. So this is what JSON is, and it's really important to have an understanding for that if you want to create more complex workflows in n8n. So now that's our first method for scraping a very simple web page in n8n. It's always the first place we want to start, because before we try more complex stuff, if we can make this work, then why overcomplicate it, right? And for most cases, this can be more than enough in terms of what you need to go off and create personalized outreach or whatever else you want to do. But some websites are a bit more complex and will need a more complicated tool to make it work. So the next tool we're looking at is a tool called Firecrawl. Firecrawl, we use this when websites are a bit more complex. So when I say complex, some websites have what we call JavaScript, and this is just a fancy way of, if you've ever seen a website and it's like got things in toggles and there's like lots of like movement in it, they've created a website that's a bit more complex and data can be hidden in it and hard to extract at times. So this website is really good for working with more complicated sites, pulling in all the data we need, and then all the stuff we did with the markdown and trying to structure it in a way that can be used, it does it for us. So this is the website here, Firecrawl, and let me show you how to use it. So you want to create an account first. And once you've created an account, you go to this playground section here. And then the first thing you want to do is you want to add the URL of the website you want to scrape. So here's an example website. This is called Creator Science. It's all about creators, but you can see here it's a bit more of a fancy website. You've got these dynamic testimonials. It's a bit more complex a website. So if I copy this here and I go into Firecrawl and I paste it in, it's going to do a really good job of scraping the data in it. So we'll just let that go through and scrape. You can see here, it's gone through and it's scraped all the data, and it doesn't have all that complicated code like we've got before. We're just getting the text straight away, which is really useful. Another really powerful thing this site can do is what's called crawl. So what it can do is it can look for all the different subpages a site may have, and then it'll pull the data from them as well. And it can get a map. So if I press this, it basically tells me all the different URLs on this website. So you can see here, you can see all the different URLs associated with it. So if you really wanted to scrape every single bit of information from this website, this is the place, this is the way to do it. So that's all well and good, but how do we get this in n8n? So to do that, I'm going to use a different site because I'm thinking about this from the perspective of someone who wants to do cold outreach. They want to scrape some information and send a personalized message. So this person is selling this service called the lab. So I found the website for it. I'm going to go in and I'm going to scrape this website. And the idea here is I want to scrape the information using Firecrawl. I want to bring this into n8n, and I want to have these n8n workflows where I can use this to send personalized outreach or add this to my CRM or any other business activity that I may need to do. So the way to do this is we want to go to extract here, and we want to let Firecrawl know what information we want to get from the scraped data that is collected. Because there's a lot of information, we just want to tell it, this is the data that we want to get. So to do that, you want to add in a prompt. So I have a prompt here, and what I'm saying is that I want to extract all the copy on the website in plain text. I want to provide a one-line summary of the website, and I want to identify the company name and list the company services. And I want to create a one-line personalized icebreaker or a cold email to the owner of the company. So when I press generate parameters, what we'll do is we'll just create a JSON breakdown of the different information I want. It says I want copy, and the format will be, and it will just do this and tell you this is the information you want and how you should structure it. So now we want to get this in n8n. The way we do it is we press integrate now, we get the copy. And we want to view the documents, the API documents, to figure out how we can get this into n8n. So really, we want to go to this extract section. You want to go down. And here's an example of how we can get the information from them. So we want to use the CRL and we're going to copy it and we're going to go back into n8n. So let's delete all of this. We'll add a new HTTP request node. And a little trick, when we've been given a CURL in an API documentation, rather than filling this all out ourselves, what we can do is press on the top right here and we can paste in what we have. And it's going to fill in everything for us. It just saves us so much time. So now we want to make sure we add in our API key. So we'll go back to Firecrawl. You have your API key here. So I'm going to paste that in. And then next we have this body. So what they've done is they've given us an example of a body that we can send across. So we know we need to add the URLs, we know we need to have a prompt, and here is the parameters that need to be included. So this is what we did before when we came up with this. So rather than type this all out, because it can look quite intimidating, this big block of code, we're going to use ChatGPT to help us. So let me open ChatGPT. And here we go. So we're going to say, help me format the JSON body for my HTTP request. So we're going to give it the schema first. So if we go back into Firecrawl, you want to give it this section. So we'll do the toggle here just so we can copy and paste it. Go into ChatGPT, we'll paste it here. Then it's going to want the prompt we want to use. Go into Firecrawl, we have the prompt here, we already wrote it. Then paste this in here. We want to give it the URL, so we know this is the website we want to scrape. And then we want to give it the example body. So this is the example one we were given. So this shows you don't need to be a coder. I don't know what any of this means. You don't need to be technical. You can use this no-code platform and you can use ChatGPT and it's done for you. As long as you know the high-level technical concepts, you start learning what JSON is, you start learning how API works, then you can do so much by yourself without needing to be technical. Here you go, that's all done for us. So I'm going to copy this, we'll go back into n8n now. Let's replace this. There we go. So what we're going to do is I'm going to test this step, but it's not going to work straight away. See, it's successful, but we don't have the data. And the reason is because this process of web scraping is not instantaneous. First, you have to send the request off, and then you need to wait a while, and then you send another request to check if it's actually working or if it's finished. So we've sent this first request off. We now want to set up another node to check if it's actually been processed so we can get the data. So we set up another HTTP request node and we'll go back into Firecrawl and the documentation. And if you just scroll down a little, they'll have this other code here. It says below are code examples for checking an extraction job. So this just tells us, this just gives us a way of checking to see if it's finished. So I'll copy that and go back into n8n. Again, we can use our little trick of importing the CURL. It saves us doing all the headache of filling it out ourselves. Now we want to add our API key. Where is it? There we go. And what we have is we need to give it the ID from before, but put it into here. So I'm going to remove this. I'm going to give it the ID so it knows what it should be searching. Because we got the ID from the last node, we need to make sure we feed it into this so it actually knows what job to check for. So now we're going to test step. It may or may not work. If it doesn't work, it just means we need to wait a bit longer. And what you'd normally do at this point is just set up a bit of a process where in n8n you'll be like, check. If it hasn't worked, check in a minute's time. If it hasn't worked, check in a minute's time. And after a certain amount of times, then you'll stop the process. Well, we test it now, and that's fine. I'll wait a couple minutes and I'll come back and test it again. And at that point, it should work. So you can see here, now I press test step, it says it's working and it's just processing. So you can see here, it's just going through and scraping the website. So we'll just wait a bit longer. Now I probably waited 2-3 minutes in total. And here we go, we have the data here. So this is method 2 for using n8n and web scrapers to scrape more complex websites. Maybe they have a bit more JavaScript, or it's just anything where it's a bit more difficult and not as easy as like a static page. So that's method 2. Let's look into method 3. Method 3 is when we have applications that are called quote unquote walled gardens. These are stuff like social media. Because if you go to Firecrawl, if you scroll to the bottom, they'll outright say they just don't do social media websites. So if you look here, what sites work, so if Firecrawl is best suited for business websites, we currently don't support social media platforms. So if you want to scrape a social media platform, it's best to use another service. And this one is called Apify. So this one's really cool because it has an entire store where you can find web scrapers for almost any major application. So let's look at a few together. We'll go to their store, and they basically have web scrapers for every main social media. So if you want to scrape someone's LinkedIn, if you want to scrape their Instagram, Twitter, have really personalized outreach, you can do that. They can do stuff like provide a screenshot of a website to website screenshot generator. It can do really cool things. Let's look at some of their most popular web scrapers. So again, immediately you can see one of their most popular ones is Apollo. So if you want to scrape leads from Apollo, I've seen one for LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Reddit Scraper, TikTok. So they have loads of different ones. So my recommendation is if you have like a massive website that's got anti-scraping technology, or if one of the other 2 methods have failed, this is your place to go. And if it's a website that most people want to scrape leads from, it's probably on here. Someone's probably created a specific service for scraping that site. So we're going to go through and see how we can use this. The first thing you want to do is log in, create account. And when you're in, you're going to be shown this web page. So what we want to do is we want to go on store, and the example we're going to show is we're going to try to scrape a social media site. So we're going to do Instagram. So let's try Instagram post scraper. What we can do is, just as an example, if we can scrape someone's Instagram post, maybe in a personalized email, we can say, hey, I really liked X about your last post, and then we can send that across. And this is all an automated process. So an example of someone's Instagram post we can scrape. Let's see, we can try Alex Hormozi. So not that I would ever try this method to speak to Alex Hormozi, but this would be his Instagram username that we add here. You can choose how many posts you want to scrape. For the purpose of the example, I only do 3. And then you can choose what the date range you want to include. So when you do that, you press save and start. And it's going to go through, it's going to go to his Instagram account and it's going to scrape that information. And here we go. We see, scrape the information. We have the captions, the name, we have the links, the like counts, So we can use this to incorporate into our personalized outreach workflow. But you can see now this is still in Apify. We want to get this information into n8n. So let's see how we can do this. So we'll go into n8n. Let's just get rid of these. We'll open up a HTTP request. Now let's go back into Apify. And what we want to do is go to here on the top right where it says API. We want to scroll down, and this is what we're looking for. Get dataset items. It returns the items stored in a default dataset of this run. So we're going to copy this, go back into n8n, and we're going to paste this in here. Now, if we test this step, there we go. We get all the information here, and we can now use that into an n8n workflow. We can add an AI agent to do stuff with this data. So again, this is like a super useful workflow we can use as it is. But what I don't like about it so far is that we've had a manual process where I've had to take that link and paste it into n8n. If you want to do this at scale, you don't want it to be manual. So I'll just show you a very quick example of how to automate it using a webhook. So a webhook, we delete this, we'll add it in, and then I'll explain to you exactly what it is, because I really want to try as much as possible to explain all the technical terms you come across. So a webhook, the way a webhook works, it's essentially just this process of different apps being able to speak to each other because they're waiting for a particular type of information. So here, for example, we're a receiver app. n8n is the receiver app. And it's just using this webhook to say, let me know when you have new data. And the sender app is like, cool, when I have new data, I'm going to send it across to you, and you'll get a ping that basically says new data has arrived. It's as simple as that. So this is how that node works in n8n. So if we go back to n8n, what we want to do before that is actually connect the nodes. Let's open this up, and we want to test this out. So I'm going to copy this URL, and then I'm going to go into Apify, and we want to make it so that when we do a web scraping process, it just automatically sends it to n8n. So to do that, you want to go on integrations here, set up an integration, and here we can see HTTP webhook, and you can see here it says send post HTTP request. Now, if you're thinking about what's a post, again, I want to explain the technical side as well, so you're really learning how you can use this yourself. We already learned back all the way at the beginning that HTTP is just a way for computers and servers to speak with each other. So here's the server, here's our computer, and it just uses these HTTP, and it's like a rule book for them to speak with each other. Here it says get, for example. And we know this is the process, whereas you have a device, it sends a request to the server, and the response comes back. What these responses are, the rulebook for communication, is you just have these common HTTP requests that basically says, if we use get, we just want to receive information. If we use post, that means we want to add some data to a server. And we just have all these different rulebooks. You know, maybe we want to delete something for a server, and so on. So here is just telling the request what it should do. Should it only receive information? Should it update information? Should it delete information? This is how the HTTP requests work. If we go back into Apify, we know it's asking for a post. So we'll press that. And we want to select the trigger. So we want this to start when the run has succeeded. So when our scraping is succeeded. And here's asking for the URL. So this URL is the URL we've copied here. And this is the way that they're able to communicate. So the URL here the way in which they'll be able to talk to each other. So this middle step we have in our diagram here. So we'll add the URL in to Apify. There we go. Now we can test it. So in order to test it, we want to make sure we're listening for the test event. So this is just us telling n8n we think something might be coming, just keep an ear out. And now let's save and test. So there we go. Now it's sent it across, and we should go into n8n and that should be able to hear it and get the data. So this is just going to be a test to see if it works. And it's not going to work because I made a mistake. I'm going to stop listening. Here it says get. Remember when I said it was post? So we need to just make sure we're listening for the right event. So I'm going to change this to post. I'm going to go back now. And again, what I do, I need to copy the new URL. So I had the old URL from before. So I'm going to copy this, go back into here one more time, add the new URL. Now save and test. Oops, listen, then test. There we go, succeeded. So it's very easy to make little mistakes where you change something and then a new URL comes up. So it's just always important to keep an eye out. But you can see now we've got some data. So that was just a test event. Now we want to make sure it works for real. So what we'll do is we'll go back and we're going to run this web scraper again. So now this has succeeded. It should have sent a webhook to n8n with all this data. And now we go, we've got the data now, but we can't use it just yet. We need to update this HTTP request so that we give an ID from the webhook so it knows what data to search up so we can show the information. So if we bring this up here, before we were using this ID to go to Apify and say, show me this data. Now we're using a new ID and we want the ID to be associated with the webhook. So what we'll do is we'll delete this bit here and we'll scroll down and we want to look for default ID. Yeah, default dataset ID. I'm going to drag that over and put that in here. So now it's going to take the ID from the webhook and we're going to use this to get the latest data. And there we go. Now it worked. We have all the data in n8n and it's automated. So now you have 3 different processes for web scraping. You have a very simple one that can scrape simple static websites. You can use Firecrawl for doing more complex websites with JavaScript, and you have Apify, which has a library of thousands of web scrapers that you can use to get into very complex websites. And you know how to bring all this data into n8n, and you can use that to create really powerful workflows. So I hope this video has been useful, and I'll catch you next time.